You're on.
We're on. Move alternate. Oh,
We did.
I already did. I'm sorry. Okay, we're going to call to order the May 19th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board. Welcome, everybody. And we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, if we could do the roll call.
Mr. Kincaid?
Here.
Ms. Otto?
Present.
Mr. Einhauser?
Here.
Ms. Longstreet? Mr. King?
Here.
Mr. Mithers?
Here.
Mr. Freitas?
Here.
Mr. Saris?
Here.
Mr. Gibson?
Here.
Okay, our first order of business is approval of the minutes of the meeting that we had on March 24th. Does anybody have any additions or edits to the minutes? We have a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we have section now for public comment. Do we have any public comment for anything not on the agenda tonight? Seeing none, we're going to move on. New business. Our first order of new business is a conditional use permit renewal for Coneheads Ice Cream.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Our first order of business is a renewal of a current conditional use permit for Coneheads Ice Cream, 570 A18 Beach Boulevard. Maggie Costa has owned the property since 2011. She applied for her first conditional use permit for outside seating in 2012, and it was approved and granted for 3 years. She renewed it again in 2015, and it was granted for 5 years. Now she is back because it expires June 1st, 2020. We have had absolutely no complaints or issues with the outside seating at Conehead since the original conditional use permit was granted in 2012. And the staff recommendation is now that it be granted and as long as Maggie Costa owns and operates the business at 570 A18 Beach Boulevard. We recommend it not be transferable because we don't know what a new owner would do with it, but as it stands now, we think it should be granted for as long as she owns and operates the business. Maggie's here to answer any questions.
Any questions for Bonnie?
Not for me.
Okay. Maggie, would you like to address the board?
Opposite for you, isn't it?
Yes, good evening. Thank you. For your consideration, we have had no complaints. Our inside seating is limited to 4 spaces, sometimes 6 if you can squeeze the chairs in. So the outside seating does provide a space for our customers to sit and enjoy what they purchase at our business.
Anybody have any questions of the applicant?
Yes. What's the status? I don't remember from the first conditional use. It's not on the second one. Are you still using the drive-up window?
Yes, we do. That's a different variant, or is that a?
That's a different conditional use permit. I think it was renewed, Bonnie,
Separate, yeah.
a couple years ago.
That was renewed in 2017, and it's good for 10 years. So
Okay.
the
All right.
conditional use for the drive-through is good until 2027. And hopefully, when that comes up for renewal, we will also recommend it be renewed for as long as Mrs. Costa owns the business.
Just one other question, that's all I have. I drove by, but I wasn't sure of how many parking spots do you have on the premise?
We have 22.
Okay. That includes the upstairs parking available for,
I actually live upstairs, so I have 2 spots reserved for upstairs. It says tenant parking only, and then there's 22 available for the business.
okay, thank you, that's all.
Any other questions? I'd just like to make a comment. I live down the street, and that's a very welcoming place along the beach. It always seems to be happy people hanging out front, and I would like to say that during this last couple months when we've been under the different circumstances, I did notice that the tables were turned over and blocked off, and now the tables are separated, and I'd just like to thank you for the efforts to comply with.
Beverage service and consumption outside of an endorsed building known as Coneheads for the amount, for the time period that Ms. Costa owns the property.
Owns and operates. So.
Operates, yes.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your meetings are so much
Quieter.
Our second order of business is a variance applicant request.
This is a variance request for a rear yard setback reduction from 25 feet to 10 feet for a 459 square foot mother-in-law suite. The owners of the property, Mr. and Mrs. Tunder, want to build this mother-in-law suite for Mrs. Tunder's mother, who has lived with them for the past several years and is dealing with several medical issues. And we did receive just this afternoon 4 letters of support from neighboring property owners. I emailed everyone the first one. The last 3 I got all after 4 o'clock. I was on my dinner break and I apologize, but I figured you guys weren't checking your emails at that time anyway. We did copy them, and you all have copies of them. And this is a survey that shows where the mother-in-law suite is, 10 feet off the property line. You can see the lots behind it, lot 28 and 29. They are the neighboring property owners that are most affected.
Okay, I have a new survey I picked up today from the survey company that more accurately puts it on the property. Instead of a 10-foot setback, we only need 12. See how it's 12 and a half away?
Okay, that is good news, but
So it's been done more accurately with a survey instead of
I'm
me
going to keep
just putting.
these, okay?
Yeah,
Because we
yeah.
need to keep them for the
Yeah,
record.
absolutely. They got a raised seal, I believe. Well, we can get it raised.
We need a raised seal for the permit.
Okay.
But for this, it's all right. All right, so the rear setback is from 25 feet to 12 and a half feet instead of 10 feet. And this is a better survey because you can see lots 28 and 29, which are 575 16th Street, 577 16th Street, and actually lot 29, 577 16th Street is the neighboring property owner who's most affected by this. And this was the first letter we got this afternoon that I did email to everyone. They are basically in support of the variance request, and they were in support of the setback reduction to 10 feet. They do have some concerns about drainage, which Mr. Antonio and Mr. Tunder, the property owner, who are both here, can address. And then the other 3 letters, got a map here showing where the letters of support came from. 575 16th Street is the neighboring property owner most affected. That's the first letter that I emailed to everyone. 577 is also affected by the rear yard setback. Then we have a letter from a neighbor across the street at 4 Ocean Woods Drive West, and a letter of support that came, the last one we got, for 49 Ocean Woods Drive. And this shows the relation of the letters of support to the property owner's property.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Bonnie?
Yes, do we currently have any mother-in-law suites on low-density residential property?
We do. And last year, you guys approved a variance request for a mother-in-law suite on Mariposa Street. It was Mr. and Mrs. Pacina applied, and had a big lot and it wasn't a setback issue. Well, it was a setback issue. I think they were going from 25 feet to 21 feet. And it was the same thing, a mother-in-law suite. We did ask the property owners, Mr. Tunder, to sign the letter of agreement saying that it shall not be rented out. It's low-density residential. They could never have a short-term rental less than 30 days. They'd have to rent it for 31 days or more, but because it's low-density residential, and we only allow one residential unit per lot, they couldn't rent it at all. It can only be used for family members or guests of the family, not as a rental unit. And if there's a violation of that, then it goes to code enforcement.
Okay.
So even for future owners of that lot, they
The
would be
letter says
restricted?
the current owners will not rent it as a separate unit, and any new or future owners from now into infinity will not rent it as a separate unit. And Mr. Tunder, who's here, signed it, and he can address that.
But the city will keep people from renting it through the current regulations, that nobody could rent it, even without that letter?
Correct. But, you know,
Okay.
since we don't always find out about issues like this unless it's reported from neighbors, which is probably how we would find out if
Couldn't
it
you-
was rented.
Okay, never mind. Couldn't they rent it if it was a 6-month rental?
No. No. Cannot be used as a separate rental unit
At all?
at all, because it's low-density residential. The question was asked by a neighbor too, that what if the property owner wanted to subdivide the lot and break it? I mean, right now it's addressed as one address, 52 Ocean Woods Drive East, one parcel ID number. For one thing, a 459 square foot, it's not big enough to be a single-family residence to begin with. Does it have to be 800 square feet, Brian? Minimum first floor for single-family?
I'd have to look that one up. It's somewhere around there, but also keep in mind, there's only going to be one electric service to the property. We're not going to allow a separate meter to the same address. And if you look at the plan submitted, you're not seeing a kitchen per se in there. You're not seeing a cooking appliance based on what was submitted. That doesn't mean they can't have a microwave. But, so,
It could not be
Yeah.
rented. It can only be used by whoever is living in the houses at present.
But I was more worried about the letter, the affidavit or letter that he signed, that if that had the ability to bind future owners, but I don't guess that matters as long as the city regulations are what they are. It doesn't matter who owns it.
Can I ask Lex to weigh on
hold on a
that?
minute, I
Okay.
can fix this. I brought this letter, the intent of the letter from the county when I came over, because they do what they call accessory family units. It's essentially the same principle, but the reason we have it recorded with the clerk of the courts is so it transfers in the event of a sale. So they can't say they didn't know, or else they need to go talk to your title company. That's the whole reason we did this. So if it does sell, there's another, because we're not going to know if they sell the property. It's supposed to be part of the closing documents, and they should be reviewing them.
Okay, so they'd be under the same
Yeah. This is just
requirements and inspection that anybody would be now.
So this is just an abundance of caution to have the letter recorded at the county clerk of the courts.
Yes,
I'm just curious, so, as far as like the City of St. Augustine Beach's exposure in this neighborhood and all our other neighborhoods, where someone would come and say, I'd like to do a mother-in-law suite, and, go, and ask for a variance for setbacks, is this going to be a common thing? I mean, I don't have a problem with it, I'm just kind of saying, well, this guy did it, is that moving forward, okay, now for me to do it, where we might have this situation occur again, and are we exposing ourselves to something a little bit here?
Are we setting
I'll let the
precedent?
expert-
Every
setting a
variance, with
precedent.
every variance, you do risk the setting of a precedence. So that's why it's imperative that the board considers each one individually. What are the conditions for this variance reduction? Without the variance reduction, they would have to build to the current setbacks. This city does not offer reduced setbacks for accessory structures or anything of that magnitude other than small sheds. So they would have to be 25 foot and 10 from the sides, which is why you don't see a lot of these. There's one in the Ridge under construction right now, just because of the larger lots in there. But
Let me just rethink that. So, for example, this seems like a very good and worthy cause, but let's say that we are, somebody comes along and says to us, in the future, we'd like to do it, you let these people do it, and then are we able to, I don't know if I want to use the word defend, but defend, well, we let this guy do it because it was a certain situation, but we're not going to let you, Mr. Homeowner, do it because you don't meet the same criteria. In other words, is it kind of a moving target that's going to be hard to defend the next time it comes up?
I would say it's possible, but I'd probably defer to the city attorney.
You guys have a lot of discretion in issuing variances. You're supposed to look at each case as an individual basis. If you do 20 of these and you do them all at, 12 feet now, 12 and a half feet? So if you let 20 of them go 12 and a half feet off, and you don't let the 21st one, you open up a little bit of exposure, but it's still not an easy case, and it's not one that we should really be concerned about. As long as you guys are individually looking at each one, because every case is going to be different. This one has, 4 letters of support from all the different neighbors around it. You may have letters of support from different places. They may not be as close. There could be several issues. So when you're issuing a variance, each one is a tailored decision, and there's always a danger because the more you do, you build up what could cause a good challenge. But as long as this board's being fair and looking at each situation independently, you're going to be upheld. And it's going to be very hard to overturn something. I don't want to talk in absolutes.
Okay.
Can I make a quick, I've got a number of questions too. If we could go through listening to the applicant, and then we'll have the board discussion afterward, if that's all right, because I think it's going to involve staff and the attorney again. So if we could hear for the applicants, please.
Yeah, I was just curious if you had read the paperwork, why we're trying to go for
Yeah, I have.
variance?
I have.
Okay, and the reason why we're trying to do that.
Sir, can you identify?
Yeah, my name is John Antonio, and I have a construction company called Ancient City Construction, and we're looking to do the work. Now, the reason why we're trying this.
Sir, we actually need your address also.
Oh, okay, 2614 Joe Ashton Road, St. Augustine.
Thank you.
Okay, the reason why we're trying to do this is because there's a little bit of a health issue involved with Nancy Hill, which is Noel's mother-in-law. She's having a hard time living the rest of her life in an 8x10 bedroom with cans of soup and possessions, and we provided pictures. So it's just trying to make the comfort of living. Now, every in-law suite might not have medical issues, So she's still pretty good in health and everything. She just wants to lead, a better quality of life. And that's why we're going for this. I don't know if each and every person that applies for an in-law suite is going to have medical conditions. So you guys could use that in part of your thought process. But if there's any other questions, oh yeah, and about the drainage, the building's going to be built with 2 gables. So the water will shed to the right and left and not to the rear. So that'll help out. Plus the properties have good elevation, and with the water shedding to the right and the left, it won't hurt the guy in the back, we don't believe. And this is Noel, he's the owner of the home.
Yeah, good afternoon. So Noel Tunder, 52 Ocean Woods Drive East. So we lived in the house for about 17 years, and so, it's a great place for us to live. Our mother-in-law has lived with us intermittently all over the United States as we've moved from, Florida to Scottsdale and other places. This past year, she's had total shoulder replacement surgery, and so she has limited range of motion, and so we, are really trying to keep her close. We're also a small family, so it's my daughter's only living, grandmother that's local, and my wife is her only living child, and so we're just trying to keep an environment where she has freedom to do what she wants, but we're still close, and we've looked at other options to try to accommodate her even at some of the residential places, but due to financial constraints and other things, it's just not feasible. The person who would be impacted most, which are, Brian and Chandra Heffernan, who are in the back property there. I've had extensive conversations with them regarding, the 3 issues that they had that had to do with, first and foremost, which was the water. And so John addressed that. Also within that, I will be putting, gutters on the house post-construction, and then we'll make sure that the gutters then are going south and relieving in the front area of the lawn. The second issue we had, which was the larger issue, had to do with renting Airbnb and that sort of thing. we have no intent to do anything like that. I work from home, I've worked from home from, the last 20 years. In the event that Nancy passes, I will use that as just my personal office space or things. And then now that we have our daughter home for COVID, she's kind of absorbed in the extra space, that we've, had in the house. And so, with the configuration of our property, this is, kind of the best we could do with what we had available. When we started looking at adding different structures or different levels, it just got to a cost structure that wasn't sustainable. And then the last issue that wanted to address with Heffernan's, which we also talked about, is there's a forward-facing window, that is going towards their house, which puts it about 25 feet away, or 35 feet from his, actually it's 25 plus 12, right? So 35 feet away. And, we have opportunities to move that window either to, the north side or other things, so it's not facing if he's concerned about noise. But we have communicated with him that we will, work with him to make sure that we're within his guidelines on that. And then also, just on another note, I had, Brian Heffernan at my house. We looked at the elevation, so he could see it. There's really no way for water to be an issue for that because we are elevated and actually kind of planes off into our property like a bowl. And so I'm confident that won't be an issue. Any questions?
Any questions for the applicants?
I have a question.
He answered.
Why detached?
Well, it gets to a bit of a cost issue for us because we have a couple things that are going against us a little bit, right? So we have an artesian well that we're trying to work around, and I looked at the cost of filling the artesian well and moving that well, and that's relatively substantial when you're just trying to do something like this.
There's a well between this and the house.
The well, that's why I can't move the property any further forward. The other issue is that by doing it detached, we're able to save a little bit more money as it relates to doing connectivity and other things, because we are trying to work within our budget and her budget to make this happen. So it's a cost issue.
Okay, there's also on the right elevation, the master bedroom. So the only place to put it is on the right elevation of the house, because you can't really put it on the back. So if we put it on the right elevation of the home, she'd have to walk through your master bedroom just to gain access.
And then the other thing which we're considering, which is a little bit self-serving, is that we like to keep the home as long as possible. And personally, I'm not interested in trying to elevate that just for my own mobility moving forward. But that's just a personal interest. I would prefer not to have the stairs.
Oh, yeah, you don't want to go second story.
No, I know, just for me, because if I get bad wheels.
Any other questions? Okay, if you guys want to have a seat, we're going to have board comment here, and then we might be calling you back up if that's okay.
Okay, no, that's fine.
I guess the only thing that jumps out at me is the hardship under this that's being filed. It doesn't really state the medical issues that are ongoing, which is very important in this decision. And then it says it's less than financially practical. I mean, I understand that's for building the outbuilding itself, but I'm not sure if this hardship is correct of the way it needs to be said.
I had some similar concerns looking at the actual regulations for for granting a variance. And there's a number of places in there where it's asking for, if it's specific to this property, and I think this is specific to this property, but it is precedent setting, and it says that if the condition is common to numerous sites, so that requests for similar variances might come in, the board needs to make a required findings based on the cumulative effect of granting the variance to all who may apply, and that gives me a little bit of pause. The hardship is not created by the physical characteristics of the property or of the house, or an inability to reasonably use that property to your benefit. I understand, I certainly understand the hardship and support the sentiment behind it. I'm just having a difficult time with it. It specifically talks about self-created hardship, and this hardship is specific to your family and to your circumstances, not to the property and not to use of the property. So I think I think there probably needs to be more discussion about how we evaluate the hardship, and one of the things I was questioning before we came in tonight was the effect of the variance on neighboring properties, and it's obvious that you have the support of the neighboring properties. And another thing in here was, another portion of this was, if this has been granted in the past, that we would use that as in favor of granting this one. So Bonnie, could you tell us more about the one that
You're opposing.
the board granted last year, the similarities that, I'm sorry to put you on the spot there.
I'll get this one. I'm very familiar with it because I was a plan reviewer. They asked to have a variance from the 25-foot setbacks to the 20 because the entire street was built to 20 and their house was built to 20. So for 25 feet, it wouldn't have fit in the property. So you granted the variance to let it have the old setbacks. And then you also granted a tree removal, I believe, in the front. So that was that variance.
Okay.
That was a rather large lot. They weren't big enough to separate the lots to build a single-family residence for the mother. So they had to attach it. They were short a couple of hundred square feet if they tried it, so it just wouldn't work mathematically. But the variance was just to restore the 20-foot setback, which the entire street was built at.
Okay. So it's significantly different than this request, building an additional building?
Completely different.
Yeah, okay.
Is that the only one we have that you can recall? Yeah. Just trying to,
Okay, any other comment or questions about the?
I know we're all concerned about a precedent. We always are, every variance that we give. And we're always trying to justify a hardship. This doesn't sound right, but I've seen us do less for hardships. We've given people things. And, I know you said this wasn't, they didn't create it, but it's their family. So,
Absolutely.
it's not like, I'm sure if they had their druthers, they'd like her to be living on her own, someplace else, but you just, I don't know.
I can
I
empathize
understand it.
completely.
Yeah, I understand this, but I also think that somewhere we've got to have some compassion for things, but.
My concern would be that, that anybody could come up now and ask for a variance to build an additional building on a lot. And by allowing this, it doesn't really matter, because the hardship, I understand that it's a personal hardship, but it's not a hardship created by the topography or by the lot size or by any restrictions on the lot. So this is not a hardship that any other family would have in the same property. This is a hardship specific to this family in this property. And I'm having a hard time putting that in the hardship, or Chris was saying, having a hard time fitting that into the hardship definition without setting a precedent and opening it up to make our land development regulations less powerful.
In the past, we have recommended that the application be submitted again without additional fees to enter in the application. Is that something we want to talk about?
Why would we ask them to redo it?
To discuss the hardship on the application a little bit more, in more detail, so the precedent is set for not what's currently in there?
Yeah,
I wanted to ask a question. Okay, is it always 25 foot from a rear setback? Because I built a lot of houses where it was only 10 foot. Now, maybe that neighborhood is it consistently throughout that neighborhood to be 25?
City setbacks across all of the beach district is 25 foot, unless you're in one of our few PUDs or you're in something that was in a development order, such as annexation.
That's quite a bit of footage, isn't it, 25?
Yes, sir, but unfortunately, that is the code here.
and I know we've granted variances on setbacks before, and they've been to better utilize the property for this and future owners.
The biggest one you've done recently was, if you recall, I believe it was last year, a double-car garage. You took the setback to 5 foot but it backed up to a stormwater track.
And
So
had
there
no
was no
neighbors.
residence. Yeah, and they saved, the whole point of that was to move the house, or the garage to save 2 rather large oak trees.
Yeah,
Was that for Soggy? No. Was
No,
it-
ma'am, that was off Ron Parker.
yes,
Okay.
right over here.
Yep, that's right.
We've got no complaints from the neighbors, and it becomes a deed restriction for future owners.
So I'm gonna,
Jack.
yeah, we're recording this, and it's going through the microphones.
Okay, I was just saying that there are no other complaints in the neighborhood, and it will go as a deed restriction on the property for any future owners. This lady has really been living a pretty tough life in a bedroom that's really small. And it is mostly a compassion thing, and it isn't a regular sized lot, but I guess that's what corner lots can look like. She really has no other place to go.
I completely appreciate that, and I do understand and appreciate the neighborhood support and the future use restrictions on it. I understand all of that. I did drive by the property and look at the property, and from looking at the property, it's going to be hidden in the back. It's not going to be an eyesore. It's not going to be.
Right.
I don't have a problem with any of that, and it's not just the neighborhood. My concern, and maybe we have the legal counsel give us some advice, but my concern is the precedent setting that we're going to be doing for allowing people to come in and build additional structures on their property outside of the setbacks that we have set in the land development regulations.
Right, and my idea is for future considerations of this would be of a compassionate thing. You know, like if they just want an in-law suite because there's not maybe medical or, you know, I mean, could that ever be evaluated, or can anybody just do it then?
We're not asking you to prove any medical, and we wouldn't ask anybody to prove any medical difficulties. If somebody wanted to come in and say that, we would take them at face value. It's whether or not that creates a hardship under our variance structure that gives us the ability and the flexibility
Right.
to evaluate properly without setting a precedent, without weakening the land development regulations. That's, I think, my concern in a nutshell.
Okay.
So it's not really about the medical at all.
Okay, all right. Okay, well then, I guess you guys are gonna decide. All right.
Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, just go to the podium, yeah. Yeah, you don't have to worry that you're setting a precedent that, you know, this time you've done 12 and a half feet setbacks, and so every time somebody comes and wants 12 and a half foot setbacks, that you're setting that precedent. Each lot location, each location of the shed or of the out structure on the property is its own separate evaluation. If the policy is of the commission is that they don't want to have any of these, then that's okay, the mother-in-law suites, that can be your decision. But each variance is by itself an independent evaluation of the situation. And I agree with you when you're saying the medical is not all that, it's not really supposed to be the fundamental for what you decide. It can be a factor, but it should not be the fundamental factor. It should be the property, the structures, and so you guys should make something that makes sense and is coherent, and when the logic is applied to something else, it would make sense. Now, if you decide that as a community, it's important to be able to take care of family members and that mother-in-law suites are something that should be allowed to have a variance if it makes sense, then once you step past that, then you're just evaluating whether these particular sets of setbacks work, whether something else, you might ask them to do something different. You might have concerns because there's a neighbor that has concerns about the drainage. You may want them to do something about that. But each one is separate, and if you're juggling, I mean, you have allowed mother-in-law structures in the past, so they're there. So the question is then, really, are the setbacks too much? Are they not enough? Those are where your real questions are.
What are we doing to our variance process, though, by allowing a compassionate consideration into the process for hardship?
Without offense, I don't think that that's exactly the test. If there's a community desire to keep families intact, regardless of whether there's a medical condition, that is usually the legislative reasoning behind having a family out structures and allowing these kinds of buildings. And so then, once you've gone the step of deciding you're going to allow these kinds of structures, it's not really all that important what the compassionate reasons for it are. You then get to a set of, is the variance reasonable with the property? Does it make sense to allow this for the setbacks and all those things?
But the variance process requires a hardship. And at what point does the hardship become, I bought too small of a house, I need a bigger house? And if that's what we're opening this up to, then everybody who comes in here and buys a two-bedroom house can expect to be able to build onto it or build an additional suite. And again, getting rid of the compassionate part, I almost think that has to be added if we do this, because that does separate it out from everybody who says, I bought too small of a house.
Yeah. Not that I'm trying to guide anything, because you guys can decide what you want to decide, but the logic when you think about out structures is more, I would be looking at the square footage on the lot as itself, and so especially with this irregularly shaped lot, that could be a reason to allow a variance if they're not over their capacity, and I don't know where they are, Brian, for square footage used. I would assume this wouldn't be approved if they were above that.
I think the lot supports.
No, they're limited to 35% lot coverage and 40% impervious surface ratio.
So what are
They're
they?
same as everybody else.
With this, would they be in violation of that?
They wouldn't get a permit if they were, right?
Correct. They would be denied. They'd have to apply for another variance. So,
Okay.
yeah, I don't know if Bonnie has the numbers calculated.
Okay, because that would be a question for me, because one of the things when you look about this individual lot is it is an unusual shape, and so that would be a good reason to give a variance. If they're not over the percentages, then you're allowing them to build out to the allowable structure on the lot, and you're making some variances because of the shape of the lot. I kind of agree with you that the compassion part is not really a part of this for the analysis for where you allow the variances. But if they're allowed to have a structure, and if the mother-in-law structures, then really the analysis should be, what's the best positioning? Is this really a requirement because of the lot to go to this extra space? And those are all very valid questions for this board.
Okay,
So
thank you.
You're in the right ballpark.
Comments, anybody?
I do
I'm
think
doing it right now.
the additional square footage does bring value to the property. So, in the case of a resale for them, it does bring, because you're now jacking it up to, 2,400 square feet, 2,500 square feet. So, as far as the property.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that's all fine. But everybody could make the argument that, hey, look, I'm going to make my property worth more, I'm going to do this to it. I'm going to do this to it. And at some point, our land development regulations become worthless if we don't follow them, if we don't have a reason to go outside and around them. And that's what I'm looking for here, is that reason. So,
Can I make a comment on that as well?
sure. And anybody else have any comment or questions of?
Did they check the figures of the footprint, 35%?
Brian's looking at that right now.
Okay.
But they won't get a building permit if it exceeds that, so supposedly.
And just
Then
to
it'll be a moot point.
Right.
Well, wouldn't that be nice to know now? I mean, do the calculations. Anyway, sorry.
Yes, sir.
Another point I would like to bring up, and it just was brought to my attention. I mean, we've done probably 3 or 4 different drawings to fit within the configuration of our lot, right? And so, I mean, that's one of the things I wasn't thinking about till it was brought up, because if if I bring the house up 10 more feet or 5 more feet, then I'm dealing with the variance on on the east side.
The right side, yeah.
And if I try to put it on the back where my porch is, then, that's total variance going now than 25 feet the other way. And so, I mean, I'm in a position where, I can't do anything else, with it. And I understand your point of, well, people should buy a bigger house. I mean, I bought a house 17 years ago, we had one child, and, we're living our life, and.
I'm not suggesting that you.
No, understood, right, but I mean, that's not where our sentiment from is. Our sentiment is, let's take care of, our people, and let's see if we can make this happen, because our intent, I would prefer not to move from the area to make this accommodation, right? And because we love where we live. And so, we're just trying to do everything we can, but I do think, I don't know what what you're talking about of the hardship part of it, but I mean, I would say that we are facing a little bit of hardship, but trying to get the combination to get the square footage in it as a result of it, because it's that extreme pie shape. And that's just my comments.
I think you've done a good job putting it where it is, and the way, and driving by your property and looking at it. Our problem is not with you. I think right now we're trying to look for a way to help you. Our problem is that we have to sit here next month and listen to the next applicant come in a month after and a month after. And, any other comments?
Mr. Kincaid, just to answer your question about the square footage, according to the property appraiser page provided, it's a quarter of an acre. There's 43,560 square feet in an acre. That's going to allow, or that's 10,890 square feet. I'm unsure if the screen porch is screened on the roof or not at the rear.
It's not screened.
Okay, so it's got a hard deck roof, so I included it. That came to 25.67% lot coverage. That means they're allowed 1,015 square feet, and I believe this addition's in the 800s. So in theory, based on what's provided, 500, so in theory, what's provided would comply with 35%.
Under the 35%. Okay, any other comments or questions?
May I make a simple recommendation that we just go through the limitations on granting the variances and just go through the individual items, and then the board can discuss each one individually? That way we stick to the code and the conditions required to grant the variance.
Okay.
Now, I can read them out loud if you'd like, or I can just put them on the overhead. I mean, I'm more than happy to read them.
I was going to say, I have them here in front of me, but if you want to go ahead and read them, I think then we can discuss each one.
Discuss each one individually, and then we can...
Would you rather read them yourself?
No, I'd rather have them, yeah, on the overhead.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I would, but that's me. Thank you. I don't like to be read to. I just don't. Nothing personal, Brian. I just like to be read to.
Yeah, one gets a little long.
Might be from my childhood, I don't know.
All right, so there's number one.
Okay. I would go out on a limb to venture that we don't meet number one, because economic use of the property is not inhibited by not granting this.
Do we want to just vote on an unofficial vote on each one, just tally it up at the end? Yeses versus nos? Or is that inappropriate?
No, let's just.
If anybody, we just go through and have comments. If anybody's got a comment on any one, let's comment on it, and at the end, we can go ahead and we'll make a vote on the whole variance. Any other comments on number one?
I mean, like you said, but what I just mentioned, it does increase it, but I mean, we're not. I mean, I see what you're saying by not granting it, but yet if we do, it does give it the economic value.
But it increases the economic value, but the hardship doesn't, there's no inability to make reasonable economic use of the property.
I would agree.
Okay, anything else on one? Number two, please. I think we've discussed that it is precedental, and The other one that we talked about is not really similar. Any other comments on number 2?
We would actually have to look further back to see what the board has approved in past years to really get a good comparison.
Right. Number 3. Yeah, we've discussed number 3. No questions on 3? Number 4?
So everybody reads those 2 lines, I'll flip the page.
Done.
Any questions on number 4? Number 4, I mean, he's had the property for 17 years. I think the variances have, I mean, the setbacks have kind of moved back and forth.
Yeah, but between 20 and 25 feet, I doubt that they've ever been 12 feet here in this city.
Okay, any comments or questions on number 4? Number 5? I think he clearly meets number 5. Number 6? Number 6, we've taken care of with neighbors supporting it. No, there's no dissenting letters that we've gotten or opinions for this.
No, in the conditions that the one addressed, they've addressed them.
Yes. Number 7, that I doubt's going to happen. Okay, that's our conditions, right?
Sir.
Maybe I take you back to 1, just real quick. Something just so that you, because I'm a little concerned maybe we're analyzing that one wrong. On number 1, and the reason that I was referencing the square footage usage, if the lot was a different shape, then he would be allowed to do this build out regardless of the purpose. So the purpose is to be able to move a mother-in-law in, whether it was a utility shed, a garage, all those other purposes would be okay. So that's not the problem. The problem is he economically could build out bigger, but for the shape of this lot. And he did mention that there were artesian wells and other things that were causing issues with placing it somewhere else. So I don't know that he has not met that. You have to decide that, but I think you were analyzing it maybe a little too strictly. And I think if I steer you that way, then you can come to whatever decision you want to come to. But I think that may have been a little too harsh.
So reinterpreting that, the hardship is he could build this thing legally without any problems if the lot were big enough and he could get inside the 25-foot setback. But because the lot's shaped the way it is, and because of the position of the artesian wells, and because of different factors on that lot alone, he's unable to build it without a variance.
You could look at it that way, sir. That's based on where their proposed location is. And they have briefly touched on the cost aspect. It's much more cost-effective to build a detached building. But you could take in, for example, and this is just so you see all sides, where the screen enclosure is out back, they could go into a full renovation of the house, attach it to the rear of the house. And, I mean, they're still only 26 feet, so they would still need a variance there.
Yeah.
I mean, they're limited, and honestly, if I was still a contractor, this is the route I would take.
So it is the minimal variance that they're requesting, which is what was one of our conditions as well.
I would say so.
Okay.
Mr. Law, can you pull up the map with the neighboring properties?
Would you like to see an aerial image? I can get that for you.
I'm just looking at, like, for instance, let's just take lot 48 or 46 type thing.
I'd also like to know where the artesian well is.
You know, probably without all the measurements and everything, he could do what he wanted to do without a variance there. Probably because of the size of the lots. I'm going back to the size, the pie shape of that lot.
Just for reference, can I just show you where the artesian well sits there, just so?
Sure, yes,
Just because I think it's.
Okay.
Actually, let's draw it on. That's not mine, one of these.
So, our artesian well sits right around where that circle is.
But if you were to move the building forward, you're going to be encroaching on the setback on the side. So,
Agreed, because I mean, we've pulled it as close as we can to that sideline, so we're only dealing with one setback, right? And so even if I wanted to put it, let's say I wanted to fill in the artesian well, then I could, logistically I could do that, but then I'm getting the filling of the well, and then I'm getting into a space that becomes non-functional, because now I'm looking at a 10-foot space unless I get a variance on my other neighbors.
when you might be violating two setbacks at that point,
Yeah, it just,
without doing the geometry.
yeah. So,
I think they positioned it as best they can to get it.
Any other comments or questions? I'd like to take a stab at a motion, if that's okay. I'd like to move that we approve the variance as it's written, based on the hardship of the shape and size of the lot and the ability to, and that we've granted the minimum variance in order for him to accomplish his goal of placing the additional in-law suite on the property. And with understanding that we have full neighborhood support and no adverse interests that we can determine or that I can see.
And not to be rented.
Right.
Well, that's going to be in the,
We'll handle, several of those
we
in the
won't let them do
conditions.
that, and the extra conditions.
We'll go through some conditions once we get a good standard motion.
Okay.
And may I recommend we just do something like, based upon the configuration of the lot and with support from the adjacent neighbors, the applicant has demonstrated the minimum variance necessary to construct and whatever the square footage of the structure is. And as such, the variance is granted
159.
under the conditions such as shall not be rented, shall not violate any city's land development regulations. The board can discuss if you want to prohibit a stove or an oven in there. That's up to the board to decide. And something like that.
I thought that's what I said.
Say it again.
Okay, if that's the motion, do we have a second to the motion?
I second it.
Any discussion on the motion? No further discussion?
What was the decision on the stove before you vote?
Yeah, I was just going to ask.
Is there a sentiment to add a prohibition on cooking appliances or a stove in there?
I don't know in the city, but I know in the city of St. Augustine, if you have a mother-in-law's, you can't have a stove.
The county, from the time I worked there, did not allow that either, except I believe in the special zoning district of Ponte Vedra.
So would you be prohibiting that with your inspections, or is that something we need to
I
add?
have no legal authority under the building code or the zoning code to prohibit it. It would have to be listed as a condition of this variance.
Okay, is there sentiment that there's a reason to add that into this variance?
I think you should.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, we'll add that into the motion as a friendly amendment. Okay, any other discussion on the motion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Okay, any old business on the board?
Took a lot longer than I thought it would.
No old business?
Longer than I thought it would.
Mr. Law, any old business?
No, sir.
Excellent. Any board comment?
I just have a question. I mean, I know the vacation rental is, they submitted the papers, I think, today or tomorrow for the vacation rentals, which they say it'll be 3 weeks, 4 weeks before it's approved. What is our stance in the city of people violating that?
We are enforcing through code enforcement. If somebody makes a complaint or if it's just obvious. We have probably investigated at least 5 or so. I believe we have had some people leave. But obviously, code enforcement is complaint driven.
Yeah.
So if we get the complaints and they're valid, we send our code enforcement officer out to make contact. And then if nobody answers the door, we'll reach out to property owner. If it's transient rental, we probably have the property management company's email address and phone on file. So we are actively trying, but if nobody tells us, then
Yeah, I mean, you
Don't
hate to tattle on people, but, if one person's doing what they're supposed to and the other one is reaping a profit because they're not.
yes, ma'am, that's what's actually happening.
I know.
Those are the complaints we're getting.
People who are behaving.
People are behaving and they're seeing 2 doors down, somebody do a transient rental.
Exactly. Hey, just wondering,
Yeah.
I have a question. What's being built behind Jack's Barbecue?
The brewery.
It's brewery.
brewery,
So the north of
Part
it?
of the, that's part of the,
we approved that.
Yeah, last year. That was a mixed-use district. You also
Here?
provided a variance to
We
the
did.
front from 10 feet to 5 feet. Yeah, they just poured the concrete this morning.
I was seeing that, yeah. Any other board comment? We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
No second needed. All in favor?
Yes.
Allowed to be opposed.
Out there.
Thank you, everybody.